It was meant as a light remark. Karoline chuckled, but no one else joined her. Not the host, not Jasmine, and definitely not the man seated in the third row. His hands clasped, eyes locked onto her, as though the atmosphere between them had turned to ice. Karoline hadn't seen him yet. Not at that moment. She still carried her smile, still attempting to wave off the awkwardness like it was just a brief stumble during a live show. Jasmine stayed silent. Her gaze didn't meet Karoline's, nor the camera. Instead, it had dropped toward the edge of the table. One finger tapped twice, then went still. The silence wasn't loud, but it was sharp and cold, like a pane of glass, just solid enough to contain something on the verge of breaking. The crowd wasn't upset, at least not yet. They hung in a strange pause, caught between the show's polished stagecraft and a moment that had quietly slipped off script. Until then, Karoline had held the floor. She directed the pace, owned the moment. Even the moderator had leaned slightly in her favor. But then something changed, softly, unmistakably, as if something deeply personal had been brushed against. And no one quite knew whether to ignore it or say it out loud. The camera subtly refocused. Someone on the production team raised a hand in signal, but no one could tell what it meant. Jasmine still didn't speak. Meanwhile, in the third row, an elderly man in a gray suit, wearing a lapel pin with 3 stars, one noticeably dull, remained perfectly still. No one identified him. His name wasn't on the guest list. Yet from that instant, every breath he drew seemed to reshape the meaning of all that had just occurred. The question was no longer, did Karoline cross a line? It had shifted to, was she even aware of who was present in the room? You're witnessing a moment that no one anticipated would unfold this way. And maybe the most important question isn't about who's at fault, but whether we're able to pause long enough to notice what hasn't yet been voiced. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what you think might come next. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss future stories that might just cause you to stop and see things in a new light. It had all started as a picture-perfect afternoon. The talk show American Spotlight was airing live from New York, with more than 200 people in attendance. The studio glowed with lights, microphones were perfectly placed, and the laughter came exactly when it was meant to. Everything seemed exactly as expected, and that's what made it all the more. Why was Karoline so sure of herself? She stepped out from behind the curtain like a champion. Bright red blazer, perfectly styled hair, sharp eyes, and a smile untouched by hesitation. She wasn't there to discuss. She was there to command the room. Right from her opening remarks, Karoline controlled the flow. She told her stories with perfect timing, added humor just where it fit, and paused so the audience could laugh on cue. When the host asked about the growing divide among young people today, Karoline gave a dismissive shrug. It's simple. Some are raised with principles, others are just raised by the system. The crowd responded with applause, some nodding in clear agreement. Beside her, Jasmine sat quietly, watching. She wore black, a high-collared top, no accessories. She didn't argue, didn't cut in, didn't even adjust her posture. Then the host turned to her. Jasmine, what's your take on that? Her reply was short. That comment wasn't directed at me. The room paused, if only for a second. Karoline grinned slightly as if she'd landed the opening blow. From that moment, the momentum leaned Karoline's way. The camera focused on her more often. The host appeared to reflect more conservative views, and the audience, whether out of curiosity or preference, seemed more reactive to everything Karoline said. And she felt it. She rode that energy, spoke faster, and began slipping in small jabs, subtle ones that could be missed unless you were paying attention. I think some people get invited on shows not for their ideas, but because they fit the kind of narrative media likes to promote. No names mentioned, but everyone caught the reference. Jasmine gave her a sideways glance. Still, she didn't respond. She quietly placed her pen on the glass table, almost like she was getting ready for something Karoline hadn't yet anticipated. At that moment, the camera briefly shifted toward the audience. It held for less than a second on the third row. No one seemed to notice. Karoline didn't either. Another question came, this time about how the media portrays female politicians. The host threw it out casually, still chasing another laugh. "Karoline, have you ever felt misjudged just for being a woman?" She didn't miss a beat. "Of course. But more often people misunderstand me because I don't say sorry for what I believe." More applause followed. A young woman in the crowd nodded. A man typed into his phone. And somewhere someone paused, not because they disagreed, but because something suddenly felt off. Karoline's confidence started to seem colder. Her gaze wasn't only on the host anymore. She was now glancing toward Jasmine, checking if her silence still held. Jasmine remained quiet, but her eyes had shifted out of the studio. She was staring at someone specific. No one paid attention to the man in the third row. No spotlight, no nameplate, just present. Everything in that broadcast had followed its script. The loud voice, the quiet one, the crowd, the laughter, the production. Everything was in order. Until Karoline said one more thing, just one line. She didn't expect her words to linger. Then she laughed, self-assured, believing she was still steering the conversation, unaware that just beneath her line, a man had lifted his gaze. And from that moment on, the narrative quietly began slipping away from her hands. The host steered the discussion toward a new topic: representation in current politics. A familiar issue, but one often loaded with unspoken risks. "Karoline, what's your take on those who say they don't feel heard in today's system?" Karoline leaned in a bit, fingers clasped, and replied with a calm tone. "I believe everyone's entitled to feel overlooked, but sometimes I question, are they truly being ignored, or was the path already cleared for them and now they just think it still isn't enough?" A few chuckles broke out, not out of humor, but because some in the crowd felt validated. Jasmine's brows tightened slightly. She looked down at the table, still silent. Karoline went on. "I think there are people who enter politics not out of genuine belief, but because they match the timing. They suit the campaign the image media wants to promote. Not because they're capable, but because their skin color fits the moment." The final line wasn't thrown as an attack. It came out like a passing remark, light, almost unbothered. Then she gave a soft laugh like it was just a comment in jest. "I mean, I'm just kidding." A quiet, uncertain sound echoed from a few audience members. The host hesitated, clearly unsure what to say next. He managed a rigid smile and then turned toward Jasmine. "Jasmine, would you like to respond to that?" Jasmine looked directly at Karoline and held her gaze for a few seconds, but she didn't answer right away. She blinked slowly, then turned to face the audience. That's when the camera finally panned down, and for the very first time, truly, everyone saw him. The elderly man in the third row. His eyes had never left Karoline. He wasn't leaning back. His hands rested gently on his knees. No fidgeting, no clear expression of frustration, just silence. A silence so focused it was almost tangible. Karoline started to notice it, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. She gave another short laugh and half joked, half explained, "I know I can be direct sometimes, but honestly, I think Americans could learn to take things a bit less personally." This time no one reacted. No laughter, no shifting in seats. Especially not in the front rows. Jasmine remained motionless. Her eyes weren't on Karoline or the host. They were on him, the man in the third row. And in her expression was a question, quiet but clear. "What do I do now?" The camera returned to the host. He appeared uncertain. This wasn't in the script. There was no prepared cue for what to do when the room goes completely quiet because the joke doesn't land. Karoline exhaled gently. She was beginning to feel the weight of it, not because anyone pushed back, but because no one did. And it was that silence that changed the energy in the room. Then Jasmine spoke, but not to Karoline. "My father is here today," she said quietly. The room's attention shifted toward the third row. He didn't move. No bow of the head, no gesture. Still, Karoline turned too, her eyes locked with his. No one could say how long the moment lasted. 3 seconds, 8, but for Karoline it felt like falling, without anything to grab onto. For the first time all night she didn't speak. The host said nothing. Perhaps he understood, perhaps not. Jasmine placed her hand on the table. Not to gesture, but to steady herself, something stirring inside her. I grew up in a home where my father was asked almost daily, "Where are you from?" And when he'd answer, "I was born here," they would follow up with, "No, where are you really from?" No one interrupted. There was no applause, no music swell, just her voice, even and precise. And today, when a woman says in front of him, "I'm only here because," I looked the part. Maybe to you it sounds like a joke, but to us it touches a wound that never quite closed. Jasmine didn't tear up, she didn't shout, she just kept looking ahead. Her voice steady, her words landing clearly in the still room. Karoline leaned forward, possibly to respond, but the camera wasn't on her anymore. At this point, the audience wasn't just watching a conversation. They were witnessing something else. Not a debate, but a stillness, a question forming within each of them. If I ever laughed it off because it was just a joke, was I helping keep that wound open? Something shifted. Not due to a raised voice or retreat, but because the camera stayed. It remained on the man's face, the one Karoline was now truly seeing for the first time. He sat motionless. He didn't look away, he didn't lean in. He didn't smile, he wasn't upset, he just looked at her. And in that stare, every excuse. It was a joke. People are too sensitive. I didn't mean anyone in particular. Suddenly collapsed. No one had to challenge them. They dissolved on their own. Karoline's fingers tightened slightly around the armrest. She had debated congresswomen, spoken to reporters, faced down protesters. But this was the first time she didn't know where to look. She turned to the host. He was looking downward, either reading or avoiding meeting anyone's eyes. The atmosphere had shifted. Not louder, but heavier, quieter. So quiet that even the faint sound of Jasmine's pen touching the glass table echoed like a knock on a door no one had wanted to open. Then he stood. No dramatic gesture, no screeching chair. Just a hand on his knee, a calm forward lean, and he rose, unhurried, steady. The air in the room felt thinner. Karoline leaned back a little, not from fear but from uncertainty about how to respond. He didn't approach the stage. He didn't exit. He simply stood there. Hands relaxed by his sides, gaze steady on Karoline. Not accusing, not asking, but holding something that couldn't be ignored. There were no words from him. None needed. His silence spoke louder than anything else heard on that stage. A few audience members shifted, glancing sideways, trying to confirm that they weren't the only ones sensing the change. An assistant whispered to the host, maybe about timing, maybe about transitioning, but no one moved, and the camera stayed. His face, each line, each strand of gray hair wasn't intentionally stern. It just was, like a reflection, and anyone who looked into it saw a version of themselves. Karoline finally looked at Jasmine. For the first time, they weren't two sides of a divide. They were simply two women, seated in front of a father, and in that quiet instant, Karoline thought of her own dad. Not to compare, but to remember. He used to tell her, "Speak the truth, even when it's hard." But her father had never taught her to speak the truth without knowing who was listening. And now, another father, quiet and standing, was making that lesson clearer than any debate ever had. The host tried to regain his footing. "Let's now move on to the next part of the program," he said, voice slightly shaking. No one stopped him, but no one was truly paying attention either, because the image of the man in the third row had become the room's steady center. He hadn't spoken, hadn't interrupted, hadn't judged. Yet somehow, everyone felt that something inside them needed a second look. Jasmine briefly placed her hand over her heart, then lowered it and turned toward Karoline. Her eyes didn't show anger or forgiveness. They were just looking, waiting to see if the other could meet them. Karoline gave a slight nod. No one else noticed it, only she knew she had. And the man in the third row, calm and deliberate, took his seat again. No clapping, no visible relief, just the stage lights softening, as if even they understood. This moment didn't belong to anyone. It belonged to truth. And truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to stand. When her father sat again, Something in the air calmed too. No. One requested silence, but no one saw a reason to break it. Karoline leaned back slightly in her seat and remained quiet. The host moved to the next segment, or tried to. But it was obvious to everyone. The flow of the show no longer belonged to the script. Then Jasmine started to speak. I used to think I really understood my father. Then one day I found out he had once been called the educated houseboy while serving as an officer overseas. No one interrupted. The cameras subtly adjusted their focus. No edits, no transitions. He never told me that story, Jasmine continued. I overheard it at dinner when my mother mentioned it. I asked him, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" He just replied, "Because I didn't want you to carry bitterness. I wanted you to carry light." A soft exhale came from someone in the audience. Someone else bowed their head, not out of emotion, but because it felt like a memory they didn't know they had was just put into words. Jasmine paused. Not because she was unsure, but to give the room space to catch up. I used to think maybe my father was too gentle, she said, that maybe he forgave too quickly. But when I was 16, I saw him at a land policy hearing. He was the only black person in the room, and he didn't waver. He didn't take anything back. Later, I asked him, "Weren't you scared?" He smiled and said, "I'm not afraid of their silence, I'm afraid of mine." In that moment, the audience didn't see Jasmine as a public figure. She wasn't trying to win anyone over. She was simply sharing a memory. And in that memory, each piece began to take shape, as a mirror. And that mirror reached into the hearts of those who once believed this wasn't their issue. Karoline shifted, slightly. Her expression wasn't defensive. She wasn't trying to protect herself. For the first time, her focus wasn't on herself. Jasmine continued, "When I got into politics, my father didn't congratulate me. He just said, 'It won't be the cruel words that undo you. It'll be the words people say when they think no one's listening.'" Then she looked directly into the camera. "Today, someone said it was just a joke, but remember, every joke has listeners, and sometimes those listeners are the ones who never speak." A subtle shift moved through the room. No one spoke, but people adjusted slightly. Some sat a bit taller, others nodded gently, as if something long left unsaid had finally been recognized. Then something unusual happened. No one said sorry to Jasmine. No one defended Karoline. Yet, the room leaned toward Jasmine, not with clapping, but through a shift in understanding. For the first time, the host spoke without reading from the teleprompter. "I think sometimes what matters most isn't part of the script," he said. Jasmine didn't respond. She simply tilted her head, not in agreement, but as if offering the story she had told equally to everyone present, even Karoline. At that moment, Karoline lowered her head slightly. Not in shame, but maybe to recognize there were things she had never truly considered. Jasmine's father remained quiet, and for the first time, he smiled. Not widely, not with emotion, just enough to show that he had heard, and what needed to be seen was seen. From that point, the show no longer felt like a talk show. It became a truer reflection of the country. One person said something wrong. One person chose silence. And one person shared a memory so we wouldn't forget. Why are we still here? ChatGPT John Noi Bangi Akwet Tuchmakong. No one was asked to stand. No outro music played. The host gave a small bow and thanked the guests with a softer tone than usual. Everyone on set stepped out of something that felt both very personal and widely shared. Then the video went live. It didn't go viral overnight. No clickbait titles, no spliced-up edits. Just a full conversation, unbroken with no clear winner. No one was asked to leave the stage. 12 hours later, a journalism student reposted it from a small account. The caption read, "Not because she was strong, but because she spoke of pain without expecting anyone to cry for her." Then another post followed, this time from a white father in Georgia, under the same clip. "I used to laugh at the just joking stuff. Now I teach my son never to say that unless he knows who's listening." From there, the video began to circulate, not like a scandal, but more like a quiet truth. It passed through small circles, shared again and again. On Reddit, one user described the moment Karoline laughed and turned to Jasmine as the second privilege forgot it couldn't be seen. Another simply wrote, "He stood, and after that, we never saw Karoline the same way." Big media didn't rush to report it, but one late-night show dedicated a full minute of silence, replaying only the scene where the man stood then sat. No commentary, no music, no voiceover, just presence. At a Chicago high school, a social studies teacher showed the clip. No test followed, no class talk, just a single question handed out on paper. What makes someone change a room without saying anything? Many students wrote, "Because he was a father." One answered, "Because he didn't say sorry, but he also didn't point fingers." A Vietnamese-American student wrote, "Because it was the first time I saw a black man not asked to explain how he felt." Meanwhile, Karoline stepped away from the spotlight for a few days. Not canceled, not due to any public apology, but because, for the first time, she declined interviews. Her team released one brief statement. Karoline is spending time reflecting with her family. No one could say if it was calculated or genuine, but she didn't say her words were misinterpreted. She let them remain where they had landed and allowed the moment to echo on its own. Some believed she hadn't changed. Others said, even if she never speaks on it again, maybe change had already begun. Jasmine didn't comment on the show again, but 3 days later she shared a photo, not of herself, but a candid backstage image of her father sitting quietly after the taping. No phone in hand, no staff nearby, just soft hallway light falling across his silver hair. Her caption read, "He didn't need to be proven right. He only needed to be seen." The image didn't appear on the news, but it was printed out and pinned up in the office of a high school principal in Baltimore, a woman who used to be teased for speaking too softly. She wrote underneath, "I don't need to raise my voice to lead. I only need to stay quiet long enough for them to hear what their own words don't say." In a small Mississippi church, a pastor referenced the same moment in a sermon. Faith doesn't always come from the person who speaks clearly. It can come from the one who stays silent and still makes you want to do better. Even in politics, where every sentence is crafted and weaponized, some public figures began using the phrase, "Someone stood up." No added explanation was needed. Everyone understood. No party label attached. As for Karoline, she never issued an apology. But later, during a podcast interview, when asked, "Do you regret anything this year?" she paused for 3 seconds, then answered, "I wish I had realized a father was sitting in that room, and that not every line deserves to become a joke just because I laughed first." No applause followed in the studio, but no one scrolled away either. At a TEDx forum in Oregon, a high school junior stepped onto the stage and said, "I don't want to grow up being the one who's always right. I want to be the one who knows when it's time to stop, because maybe someone in the room has already heard that line before, and this time, they need to see someone decide not to say it again." No one crowned Jasmine the winner. There were no judges, no attorneys, no scoreboard. Just a conversation that found its end, and a room that no longer felt like the one it had started in. No cheers, no applause like usual. People just stood, not to celebrate, but to rethink what they once called a harmless joke, to remember those who never raised their voice, yet somehow shifted the entire room. In a backstage hallway photo, Jasmine is sitting by herself. No phone, no assistant, just her looking down at the folder she had earlier placed on the table, like a quiet acknowledgement. No one knows what was on her mind, but the person who captured the photo, a freshman journalism student, wrote this. Caption: "I used to think being strong meant never being wrong. Last night, I met someone strong enough to admit they were." The next week, there were no opinion pieces applauding Jasmine, no movement to boost her platform, just one phrase that began circulating in quiet student forums. Among law students, teachers, and digital creators, the line people stopped saying, and quietly those who once ended talks, jokes, or videos with "just kidding" started leaving it out. No one asked them to. It simply didn't feel right anymore. At a small bookstore in Atlanta, a printed photo of the father standing up was taped behind the cashier's counter. No caption, no explanation. When asked why she chose that image, the store owner said, Because I want people to fall silent when they see it. A week later, on a different talk show airing on another network, a new conservative guest began to reach for the usual punchline about political correctness and skin color. But this time, the host paused, didn't overthink, and gently interrupted. Sorry, but we've had a conversation that reminded us some things don't belong in the light content segment anymore. The guest went quiet, and something shifted in the room. No confrontation, just the first time someone chose not to let it pass. As for Jasmine, she didn't go on a media circuit to discuss the moment. She didn't post any follow-up. She simply continued her work. But something subtle changed. After every hearing, she began closing her notebook and making direct eye contact with each person in the room. For 3 seconds, before leaving. She never said why, but anyone present understood. She was making space. Just enough time for people to reconsider their own words. In an internal, unsigned memo at an education nonprofit, someone wrote, "Progress doesn't always come through." Big arguments. Sometimes it arrives when someone listens and chooses not to push back. By the second week, audiences no longer quoted Karoline's exact words, but they still remembered the father who stood, a 12-year-old in Texas. The child of a migrant farm worker emailed Jasmine's office. "You didn't yell, but I could tell. You were angry, and I was too. Thank you for not fighting. I think not fighting is the strongest way to protect yourself." And just when it seemed like the moment had faded into quiet, a behind-the-scenes video surfaced. Before the taping, Jasmine was sitting next to her father. She asked him softly, "If I say nothing, will you be disappointed?" He placed his hand over hers and smiled. "You don't have to say a word. Those who are truly paying attention will hear even the silence. One show, one sentence, one man who stood up, and one woman who didn't need to win to change how a whole room thought. Where are you watching from? What part of this story made you pause? Tell us in the comments, and if you believe in the quiet strength of presence, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story that's meant to stay with you.